Synth TV.
Hey everybody, CatSynth TV, and we are very excited to present the ODC 2800 from our friends at Cherry Audio. It's a recreation of all three versions of the legendary ARP Odyssey, and it's released as part of the Centennial celebrations for synth pioneer Alan R. Pearlman. We will go over most of its features and demo a few of the presets from the factory preset pack, as well as the separate Centennial Sounds pack by James Dyson. But first, a bit of history. ARP first released the Odyssey in 1972. As the Mini Moog is to the Moog Modular, the Odyssey is to the ARP 2600. It featured a fixed topology with two multi-waveform oscillators, a resonant filter, and several modulation options. The oscillators could be configured for hard sync and ring modulation. Compact and rugged, it became a mainstay instrument for live performance and was used by many of our musical heroes, including Herbie Hancock, George Duke, Joe Zawinul, Tangerine Dream, Devo, and more. The first model, the Mark I or 2800, featured a custom two-pole resonant filter. The follow-on Mark II or 2810 featured a different color scheme and a new four-pole ladder filter, quite similar to the one found on the Mini Moog, perhaps a little too similar. Mark III, or 2820, replaced this with a new very distinctive four-pole filter, the 4075, and sported a bright, modern orange and black color scheme. In 2015, Korg reissued the Odyssey in a smaller-sized unit, but augmented with new features including MIDI, USB, and a VCA drive circuit. The Cherry Audio ODC 2800 recreates the look and feel of the original versions, as well as most of their features, plus some notable additions. For example, we see the two oscillators of the original, but also an additional VCO3. We have an enhanced VCF and VCA section, a master section that includes global performance and volume controls, and we have modulators, lots of modulators, including two LFOs, a sample and hold function, and two ADSR envelopes. The ODC 2800 can support each of the three original versions of the Odyssey and their respective filter implementations. Right now, we are looking at the Mark I or Model 2800 with its white panel. We have the option to switch to the Mark II or Model 2810 with its black and gold panel, or the Mark III with its black and orange panel. If you want to keep one of the three panels independent of the filter model being used, select UI Lock. Now the panel will stay the same even as we switch filter models. For now, I'm going to stay on the black and orange Mark III because it's my favorite. And now let's take a closer look at the oscillators, starting with VCO1. If we go over to the audio mixer, we see that VCO1's input is up, and it is set to the sawtooth wave. We can switch to the pulse wave. We can change the pulse width. And we have pulse width modulation. Right now, the modulation source is LFO1 sine wave. We can also use ADSR1 as a pulse width modulator. Switch to that now. Now by default, ADSR1 also modulates the VCA, so let's switch that to ADSR2 for now. Switch VCA back to ADSR1. Turn these back to their defaults, and turn off the pulse width modulation for now. We have control for the pitch, right now, the coarse pitch control is quantized the semitones. We can set it to just octaves, or to change continuously. We of course also have fine pitch control. We have several options for frequency modulation with up to 3 simultaneous modulation sources. For example, we can use the sine wave of LFO1 to modulate VCO1 frequency. We can switch to LFO1 pulse. We can also use the sample and hold function to modulate frequency. It takes a sample of an incoming signal based on a trigger signal, in this case the noise oscillator and LFO1 respectively. We'll talk in more detail about the sample and hold later. We can also use ADSR1. Once again, switch VCA modulation to ADSR2 for now. Okay, enough of that. The third frequency modulation input is assignable. Pressing the Assign button brings up this large menu of modulation sources. Let's try one of the other waveforms of LFO1, like sawtooth. We can use one of the other VCOs to modulate VCO1. Let's use VCO3. Now we see the sawtooth and pulse waves in the audio mixer, but we also have a sine wave for each oscillator, which can only be used as a modulation source. Let's select that. Now we can do classic FM synthesis. Oh yeah! Sweep the frequency on VCO3 to change the sound. We can turn up one of VCO3's modulation sources for an additional layer of frequency modulation. We can select a different source for VCO1's frequency modulation, like VCO3's pulse wave. Yeah, frequency modulation can be a bit wild at times, but you can also dial in some really interesting timbres. Reset all the parameters again and turn up VCO2. Like VCO1, we have the option of a sawtooth or pulse waveform, as well as many of the same controls. Right now, both VCOs are sawtooth. I recommend detuning VCO2 slightly for a fatter sound. Set VCO2 to a pulse wave. Turn up its pulse width modulation. Yeah, we're getting a nice lush sound with subtle modulation. Once again, we have various options for frequency modulation. The pitch of VCO1 stays constant while VCO2 changes. Try sample and hold. Go to the Assign input and choose VCO1 sine. Once again, the sine is only available as a modulation source. And now let's go back to VCO1 frequency modulation and select VCO2 sine for cross modulation. Cross modulation can be quite chaotic. We can dial in a stable sound. Or just embrace the chaos. Well, that feature may not be for everyone, but I have a lot of fun with it. Reset the VCO parameters to defaults. We have a sync switch on VCO2 that lets us do a hard sync with VCO1. Recall that hard sync resets the duty cycle of one oscillator based on the duty cycle of another. When we sweep the frequency of VCO2, we'll get the characteristic sync sound. Let's use ADSR1 to modulate VCO2 frequency for a classic sync sweep. Of course, we don't have to use an envelope to modulate sync sweeps. We can pick any of our other modulation sources. For example, sample and hold. We can create a looping sync sweep by switching ADSR1 from keyboard trigger to LFO pulse trigger. And now let's bring VCO3 into the mix. VCO3 also supports sync. Set VCO2 sync to VCO1 and VCO3 sync to VCO2. Now we can get a sort of double sync. Of course, there are simpler ways to use all three oscillators. We can change the base frequencies of VCO2 and VCO3 to form a triad. And we can do FM with all three VCOs. We'll have VCO2 sine modulate VCO1 frequency. VCO3 sine modulate VCO2 frequency. Dial in a good spot. And now let's have VCO3 modulated by VCO1 sine wave for FM feedback. Go from stable to chaotic. Okay, reset to the default. Go back to the Mark III panel. In addition to the 3 main VCOs, we have a noise generator with 4 different colors of noise. Right now we have white noise, which mixes all frequencies. Pink noise with a 1/F frequency profile that is a bit more pleasing. Brown noise is weighted even more towards low frequencies. And finally, violet noise goes in the opposite direction, weighted towards high frequencies. Mix it together with the VCOs. We can switch the noise input on the mixer to ring mod, which provides ring modulation of VCOs 1 and 2. Ring mod is a form of amplitude modulation that produces sounds with inharmonic frequencies that have a metallic quality. Modulate VCO2 to get a dynamic but very inharmonic sound. Or sweep the ring modulation effect with ADSR1. Okay, reset to default and stick with the Mark I version. So far, we've only used the oscillators to create the sounds that we've been hearing. Now let's bring in the Odyssey's infamous filter section. The main VCF is a resonant low-pass filter. We have the 3 filter revisions for each version of the instrument. Let's start with the Mark I filter. This models the 4023 state variable filter from the original, with a more raw, gritty sound. Let's sweep the frequency. Turn up the resonance a bit. A bit more. Yeah, a bit rough and raw, but that's the charm of the Mark I. Let's switch to Mark II and try the same thing. This version uses a classic 4-pole ladder filter. Low resonance, medium resonance, and high resonance. Yeah, it's a softer, smoother sound. And now Mark III. This uses another custom 4-pole filter called the 4075. Let's try it at low resonance. Turn up the resonance. A bit more. And all the way up. This one has a richer sound than the Mark II, but more stable and clean than the Mark I. Just as I like the look of the Mark III the best, I think I also prefer its filter. As we heard, this one also self-oscillates at the highest resonance. With keyboard tracking turned all the way up, as it is now, we can turn off the VCOs and play the VCF as if it was another oscillator. Turning down keyboard CV reduces the pitch shift between keys to microtones. Turn the resonance down to a slightly more civilized level. Now the VCFs on the original Odysseys only supported low pass, but the ODC adds support for bandpass and high pass response. Let's try bandpass. And high pass. Switch back to low pass and try the VCF on a noise source, specifically the pink noise. And let's try the violet noise with band pass. Turn up the resonance and play with keyboard tracking. Switch back to VCOs 1 and 2. We have several modulation options for the VCF. We've already seen keyboard CV. We can bring in ADSR too. Switch back to low pass mode. Bring up the release a bit. Yeah, we're getting that funky, squelchy bass sound. Adjust the envelopes a bit more. Bring in some LFO1 modulation. Okay, let's take a look at the LFO in more detail as we use it to modulate the filter. Right now, LFO1 is in mono mode, which means that we have a single LFO shared by all voices. Poly mode assigns a separate independent LFO for each voice. You can sort of hear how the voices are out of phase, but this would be easier to hear with the LFO's square wave. Since that's not one of the hardwired sources, we can go to the Assign Source and select LFO Square. Now, if you want them to be in sync, you can go to Tempo Sync mode. Or just switch back to mono. The LFO square wave has its own pulse width control, which can be used for some rhythmic effects. Turn on sample and hold modulation for the filter. And now let's look at the sample and hold in more detail. It takes up to 3 different modulation sources and mixes them. It then takes a sample of the mix signal every time another designated modulation source is triggered, and then holds that sample until the source is triggered again. The trigger source can be LFO1 or the keyboard gate. Right now, we are using LFO1 as the trigger. At the moment, we are only using the noise generator as a source for the sample and hold. Let's use VCO1 Sawtooth. You can hear that the control signal is periodic instead of randomized. Bring the noise back in. The third input to the sample and hold mixer is assignable. If we go to the noises, we see another color that wasn't available to use as an audio signal, red noise. That has a frequency profile somewhere in between brown and pink. Try that one by itself. We also have a separate high-pass filter. This is a gentle, one-pole, non-resonant filter that comes after the VCF in the signal chain. Notice that it doesn't have any modulation sources. It can be used to tame really heavy low frequencies coming out of the VCF. This can be especially handy with the more aggressive Mark I VCF. You can hear a sort of bump in the low frequencies. We can tame that by bringing up the high-pass filter. We have a VCA or amplifier. It's pretty simple and straightforward. It has a drive control. This wasn't part of the original Odyssey, but it was added on Korg's reissue. The Korg version of the drive was a switch, but here it is a continuous drive control. There is also a gain control, and you can see that right now it's grayed out. We'll take a look at that in a later section of the video. We of course have modulation options for the VCA. By default, it's modulated by ADSR1. We also have an assignable source. Let's try sample and hold. Yeah, cool little rhythmic thing going there. Now, one thing you may have noticed is that in addition to the sample and hold output, we have the output of just the sample and hold mixer, without any of the actual sampling or holding. We can use this as a sum operation for the various other modulation sources to build more complex control signals. For example, we can have VCO1 square, white noise, and red noise. Switch to VCO sine. Turn these down. If we shift the frequency of VCO3 sine, we can get an amplitude modulation effect, similar to the ring mod. Try with VCO3 pulse. And add the noise back in. Okay, turn these off And now let's take a look at the master section. This has several global and performance-related controls. We have a master volume and a limiter, which is currently turned on. Honestly, I can't think of a good reason to ever turn the limiter off. We also have controls for the voice modes. Right now, we are in polyphonic mode with 8 voices. We can set it to just 4 voices. You can hear how the top voice was dropped when we played more than 4 voices at once. We have mono mode, which is like the original Odysseys. Notice how the VCA gain is more active. In mono mode, we can turn up the VCA to hear the oscillators without any keys engaged. This allows us to create drones. Let's bring it up now and adjust some of the parameters to create a simple drone. We also have duo mode, which emulates the duophonic behavior of the original Odyssey. If I play one note, both VCO1 and VCO2 will sound together. But if I play 2 notes, VCO1 and 2 will be used separately for the first and second notes, respectively. This is also known as paraphonic on modern synths. One note with both VCOs, and 2 notes. Switch back to poly mode. We have a traditional pitch bend control. We can increase the range. Now you probably notice these 2 controls change as I move the pitch bend. These 3 controls here are the proportion pitch control system that appeared on several ARP synthesizers in the 1970s. These were pressurized pads. The left bent the pitch downward, the right upward, and the middle added vibrato. These could be used quite expressively. I can imagine George Duke or Herbie Hancock pressing these. To use the proportional pitch control, turn down standard pitch bend and turn up this lever. Now we can use PPC with the pointer on our screen, but unfortunately we don't have any touchscreen controls. We can use MIDI pitch bend to control the left and right PPC pads, and the mod wheel to control the center vibrato pad. Cherry Audio has provided additional performance controls for Aftertouch. These allow us to map channel or polyphonic Aftertouch to up to 3 different parameters in the instrument. For example, I can have Aftertouch control VCF cutoff frequency. That's kind of the obvious one, isn't it? We can simultaneously use Aftertouch to control VCO1 pulse width, and LFO1 rate. Change the Aftertouch VCF1 cutoff control to negative and increase LFO1 modulation on the VCF. Instead of LFO1 directly, let's modulate the VCF with a sample and hold. The sampling rate will be controlled by the Aftertouch, along with VCO1 pulse width and VCF1 frequency decrease. Okay, so while nobody was looking, I adjusted the VCOs and VCF a bit to give us a nice fat analog sound. Now let's take a look at ODC's effects section. We have 5 different pedal style effects arranged in series. We have distortion, dual phaser, flanger and chorus, echo, and reverb. There's also the so-called effect modulator. This is essentially an extra LFO that can be used to control a specific parameter in each effect. It has its own speed, waveform, delay factor, etc. Let's try the distortion. We have a tube mode, it's good for bass. Here, the effect modulator controls the drive. We also have a fuzz mode. Modulate the fuzz drive. EQ mode is just the EQ parts of the distortion. In this case, the modulation controls the middle band level. Now let's look at the dual phaser. This is modeled after the Mutron biphaser. It has 2 independent phaser sections. Set different speeds for each section. Switch section 1 to 6-pole. A little less depth there. And set section 2 to 12 poles. For this effect, the modulator controls the mix level. Moving on, we have the chorus and flanger effect. This is a single unit that contains both a classic flanger effect and a chorus effect. Mix controls the balance between the two. Change flanger speed. Depth. And now the chorus, which has controls for speed, depth, and waveform. Adjust the balance between the flanger and the chorus. The modulator can be used to control the balance. We have an echo effect with digital, tape, and digital ping-pong modes. Start with digital. Adjust stereo spread. We have a modulation control for the time of the delay. Switch to tape mode. And we have a reverb effect. We have several different reverb types. Start with room mode. Increase decay and pre-delay. Try the hall mode. Use the high-pass and low-pass filters to make it a little less live. We have a plate reverb. We have a spring reverb. Notice that the spring doesn't have any pre-delay. And of course, come on, say it with me, we have Cherry Audio's Galactic Reverb. Add back in the other effects. And there you have it. For the remainder of this video, we will look at some of the factory presets, as well as the Centennial Preset Pack. Start with a few factory presets. review from the Centennial Expansion Bank. We hope that you've enjoyed this detailed look at the ODC 2800 in all its flavors. To find out more, please visit cherryaudio.com and check out the description below this video. You can also find out more about the Alan R. Pearlman Centennial celebrations from the Alan R. Pearlman Foundation. Thanks for watching, and please subscribe to CatSynth TV.